said to me, what are you debating and what's the motion? And I told them, and they were quite surprised, that I was speaking in favour of this idea of education failing our economy. Because on first appearance, it would suggest that I'm attacking teachers. And I have been one for 21 years, so it would be rather sad to have come out of that process and find myself attacking myself. But this isn't really a motion about what teachers are doing in classrooms, and nor is it a motion about what's happening in individual schools. This is really a motion about what is the purpose of education, and is that stated purpose of education fulfilling its stated outcomes? You'd be hard-pressed to find any politician over the past 20 years who hasn't stood up and said the statement that we need a globally competitive education system that meets the needs of the global economy. And constantly we hear this idea that the purpose of our education system is to provide fodder, if you like, to be globally competitive. So even if we take away the overarching question of what is the purpose of education and should it have wider and better social and beneficial aims, even if we just take that simple statement of is it there to serve the economy, we'd have to say no, it's failing. It's failing partly because we don't know what the economy actually is, and because it shifts and it changes and it's not a fixed entity, and we can't really say with any element of certainty of what the economy will be in 10 years, 20 years' time. I grew up in a small northern town not far from here, Burnley, and in my parents, just one generation away, in my parents' day, you went to school and you were sorted. And you were sorted into one of two categories. You went to the secondary modern, in which case you were fodder for the mill or the mine, or you went into a grammar school, in which case you were going to be the person who educated or healed the person who went into the mill or the mine. And that was pretty much it. There was full employment. My mother could walk from one mill to the next within a day and find a job. But it was very clear from the minute she walked into school which she was. And it was clear for my father as well. We've moved into a different sort of system where the rhetoric has changed, where we say we have a more egalitarian meritocracy, where children can succeed, where we want more children to go to university. But the reality is, if you look at the figures, lots of children from low-income families just don't make it. We still have a sorting hat, and we're still separating those children out. So it's not just a question of whether our economy is being failed, but whether our wider society and the needs of those children are actually being failed. If you ask companies, they would say fairly emphatically, I think, yes, we are failing them. A recent survey, surveyed this week actually by the CBI, found that 2/3 of companies believe that secondary schools are not preparing children effectively for work. 41% of them believed that graduates were not prepared for any kind of employment. Pressure on schools to produce exam results has led to as opposed to the end of compulsory work experience. So a lot of schools have pulled 2 weeks, year 10 work experience out of their curriculum altogether. That used to be a common part of a child's educational experience. And yet 79% of employers think that work experience is crucial. And when you look beyond school, what we often find is that a lot of children are no longer taking up Saturday jobs or part-time work or newspaper rounds or all those kinds of things that used to be a common diet of a teenager's experience because of exam pressure, because they feel they can't take the risk of not passing those exams. So we have a complete disconnect between that stated purpose of education and the outcomes that are happening. The government says it's committed to both vocational and academic routes, and yet they narrowed the curriculum to such an extent that most vocational courses have been taken out of 11 to 16 schools altogether. They've removed the funding from FE sector to the point at which they've cut it off at the knees, and the FE sector is struggling to provide the education that the government says it wants to provide. They say they're creating 3 million more apprenticeships, but when you look at that, most of those apprenticeships are in the 25+ age bracket. And what FE Week found in an investigation was that those companies saying that they're funding apprenticeships are actually just rebranding their own employees as apprentices so they can pay them less and claim money from government grants. If you look at the 16 to 18 figures for apprenticeships, they've actually remained fairly static. We have 47% of graduates leaving university at the moment and taking up non-graduate positions that didn't need a degree in the first place. They're leaving those universities with up to £50,000 worth of debt and doing a job that they could have easily done at the age of 18. And then we get this really confused language coming from government about what counts as a good subject, what counts as a subject that has value and purpose in life. We have the rhetoric that STEM subjects are the most important subjects for children, so science, technology, engineering and maths are the single most important subjects in school. And yet, what we find is that the second most highly employable subject taken up at university, the one after medicine, medicine is the highest, the one that leads to the highest level of employment is media studies. Now, how many times have you read in the media, ironically, that media studies is a Mickey Mouse subject with no value whatsoever? And then let's look at what our economy actually is. Our economy is a powerhouse, if you like, for all kinds of activity, social mobility in our society. What has sustained us through a recession? Well, look at the creative industries. The creative industries during the recession grew at 3 times the rate of any other sector of our economy. The creative industries contribute £76.9 billion a year to our economy, £8.8 million an hour to our economy. 1.7 million jobs are in the creative sector. It's growing even faster now we're out of the recession than it did during the recession. And yet we have an education secretary who stands up publicly and tells children that arts will damage their future career prospects. So I would say, yes, education is failing our economy. It's failing it because it doesn't value the very subjects that those children need to succeed to go on in life. They don't have to go on to be actors or artists or sculptors, but what research shows us is that structured arts activities that engage children in school increase softer skills like communication and creativity by 17%. A study in the US of 25,000 students showed that pupils studying arts activities improved performance in maths and English. Another study, also from the US, found that students from low-income families were 3 times more likely to go to university if they'd studied arts subjects at school. And yet, look at what the EBAC has done to our arts education system. Since the introduction of the EBAC, take-up of arts subjects overall has fallen by 14%. In design technology, it's fallen by 29%. And among children from low-income backgrounds, those on free school meals, it's fallen by 23%. So closing the gap becomes even more difficult because of the curriculum that the government is putting in place under the auspices of suggesting that that will help children from more disadvantaged backgrounds. There's a complete disconnect between the rhetoric and the policy, the intention and the outcome. And then we need to think about what do children actually need in the workplace. I was listening to Ray Maguire speaking, and Ray Maguire used to be Vice President of Sony PlayStation Europe, and he was speaking at a conference the other day, and he was speaking at a conference that had 200 young people there. They were there looking at the purpose of education, and they were phenomenally engaged in that process. And he asked those 200 young people, how many of you here know what you want to do when you leave school? And about 20 of them put their hands up. About 10% of them had a fairly clear idea. And he asked those children, he went round and said, what do you want to do? And the ones who really seemed to know were ones saying, well, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a lawyer. They had a fairly clear idea. And then he told them, much to their dismay, that in a conference he'd been at looking where the heads of organisations, CEOs of organisations across the world had come together to look at the impact that technology was going to have on the future. The head of Google had turned around jokingly and said the one career I would not advise children to go into anymore is medicine, because technology is advancing at such a rate that diagnosis and lots of treatment will be done by machines and not by human beings. So, and again, it's just an idea about how we can't predict what we need. But what all companies seem to be in agreement about is what we need are creative, confident risk takers. Children who are not afraid to make mistakes, who are prepared to pick themselves up when they do fail and carry on. And how on earth are we going to produce children with that capacity when we give them one shot at passing exams, when we move to a fully linear system where if you fail, you are done? And this is what we're doing all the time to them. We're testing them at 4. There's now a proposal to reintroduce testing them at 7. We test them at 11. We're now told that if they fail, they'll be retested in year 7. We test them at GCSE. And all the research shows that children do not transfer knowledge gained for a test to any other context, including the workplace. We call it cognitive dumping. They revise, they store for an exam, and the minute that exam is over, they let it go. So there's no benefit in teaching to a test. The final point I'll make, I think I'm about time, is really thinking a little bit more about, I suppose, the whole human being. We've talked about, is education failing the economy? And I'd say it is, yes. But we also might say that that economy should be failed, that the economy itself needs to change. I personally would say that the purpose of education is to give a child the belief that they can change the world, that they can make it a better place. And I don't want the children I teach to go through the system and turn into the person who, the hugely successful person, and I won't name him, but you'll have read about him in the newspapers, who bought the patent for a cancer drug and then increased the price of it by 700% in order to make a profit. He is a successful product of an education system. He may well be serving the economy, but that's not the kind of economy or kind of education system I want. So yes, we're failing the economy, but let's make a better education system that serves a better economy to make a better world.